She thought she had only received a rotten garden and ruins, but one day her daughter made a discovery that revealed a secret worth $250 million. Subscribe and write in the comments which country you are from. The city always carried the same heavy smell of detergent and exhaust fumes, a mixture that clung to Maya Johnson's clothes long after she left her shift. Nights ended and mornings began inside the pale fluorescent haze of the laundromat where she worked, machines humming endlessly, swallowing hours like beasts with steel mouths. Her hands were raw from soap and heat, and her back throbbed with the kind of pain that came not from one hard day, but from too many hard years layered together. At 33, she felt decades older. She reminded herself each morning that she wasn't living only for herself. Every coin she folded into her purse, every hour she endured the sting of bleach, was for Eli. Her daughter's smile was the only spark left, a small flame that made the drudgery bearable. Bills stacked on the kitchen table of their cramped apartment, reminders of a life always lived one step behind. The rent was late, the electric threatened disconnection, and Eli's shoes had holes in the soles that cardboard could no longer patch. Some nights Maya thought the city itself pressed down on her like a weight, an endless grid of gray walls that offered no escape. She had stopped dreaming years ago, because dreams were dangerous when survival was the only measure of success. Then came the letter. She had opened it at the table while Eli colored in silence. Her small head bent over a notebook, scavenged from a donation bin. The paper was heavy, official, the handwriting precise and cold. It came from a law office in a county she barely remembered visiting as a child. The words shifted her world without asking permission. Her grandmother, long estranged, long silent, had passed away, and in her will left property to Maya. Land, a farmhouse, and what the papers described as an orchard of uncertain value. At first she thought it was a mistake. She had not spoken to the woman in nearly 2 decades. Her mother and grandmother had quarreled in ways children never understood, and the family tree had been cut in silence. Yet here it was, the cold script of the law declaring that the last branch of that tree was now hers. She had laughed bitterly because what use did she have for a farmhouse when she could barely pay for electricity? But as the days passed, as she stared at the envelope again and again, something inside her shifted. The city was crushing her. The laundromat devoured her soul, one load at a time. The inheritance, however worthless, was an opening. Eli was the one who truly decided it. "Does it have trees?" she asked, eyes wide, her child's voice full of curiosity rather than skepticism. When Maya nodded, uncertain, Eli's grin spread. "Then it's better than here." The words were simple, but they landed like an arrow. Maybe it was not a salvation, but it was a chance to run, a chance to give her daughter air that didn't stink of buses and asphalt. She packed their meager belongings into 2 battered suitcases, sold what little they didn't need, and within a week found herself behind the wheel of a borrowed car, driving out of the city toward land she did not know, toward a life she had never imagined. The road stretched for hours, gray concrete giving way to highways that thinned into cracked 2 lanes, bordered by fields that once had been farms and now lay silent under weeds. Gas stations appeared like ghosts, their signs faded, neon long since dead. Motels slumped by the roadside with roofs sagging inward, advertisements promising cable television as though time had stopped 20 years ago. Eli pressed her face to the window, whispering about cows, barns, and endless skies. For the girl, it was an adventure, but for Maya, every mile felt heavier, as if she was driving deeper into a past she had never wanted. By the time they reached the county, dusk was bleeding into the horizon. The air smelled different here, sharper, with hints of soil and pine. The directions from the lawyer were precise but outdated, leading them along gravel roads that rattled the car, until finally a leaning wooden sign announced the boundary of the property. Beyond a half-rotted gate, chained but unlocked, lay what had once been an orchard. The sight nearly took her breath away, but not from beauty. Rows of apple trees stretched into the dim light, but they were not alive in any way she remembered orchards to be. The trunks stood crooked and brittle, branches twisted into skeletal claws. Leaves, sparse and brown, clung in defiance to limbs that should have been lush. The ground was a tangle of weeds and thorn bushes, choking what little life dared to grow. It looked less like farmland and more like a graveyard, a place where trees had gone to die. The farmhouse hunched at the far edge, boards weathered to gray, windows clouded with grime. The roof sagged in places, and the porch leaned as though trying to flee from its own foundation. Maya parked by the gate and sat for a long moment with her hands still on the wheel. Eli bounced in her seat, excitement unshaken, already asking if they could explore. But Maya's chest felt hollow. This was not a gift. This was a bird wrapped in rot and silence. The law had named her heir, but it felt more like she had been condemned. She forced herself to step out, boots crunching against gravel. The air was colder than in the city, carrying the faint sweetness of apples long gone to rot. She unhooked the chain from the gate and drove inside. The path wound between rows of dead trees, and in the fading light the branches reached overhead like arms desperate to pull her back. When they reached the house, Eli jumped out immediately, racing toward the porch as if it were a castle rather than a ruin. The boards groaned beneath Maya's weight as she followed. The door stuck but gave way with a violent shove, spilling dust into the air. Inside, the smell was sharp with mold and old smoke. Furniture lay under sheets that had yellowed to the color of parchment. The silence was thick, broken only by Eli's footsteps, exploring rooms as though searching for treasure. Maya dropped the suitcases in the corner and stood still, letting her eyes adjust to the gloom. The house felt less like a home and more like a tombstone, a place where voices had once lived, but were long since buried. Later, after forcing open a rusted faucet that coughed before spitting a thin stream of brown water, she filled a glass and sat at the kitchen table. The wood beneath her elbows was scarred by decades of use. Dust floated in the air, caught in the narrow beams of fading light. Eli's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs, chasing shadows without fear. Maya envied her daughter's innocence. To the child, this was an adventure. To the mother, it was exile, a second-hand life passed down because no one else wanted it. Night came quickly, sweeping across the orchard in a tide of black. The trees outside rattled in the wind, branches knocking together like brittle bones. Maya lay on the sunken mattress of the upstairs bedroom, staring at the ceiling where moonlight leaked through broken blinds. The air smelled of dust and memory. Sleep eluded her. She had not slept easily since her world began collapsing years ago, and the weight of debt, exhaustion, and now this inheritance pressed down like another invisible hand. She turned her head toward the sound of Eli's breathing in the next room, steady and safe, and reminded herself that leaving the city had been necessary. Whatever this place was, however ruined, it was theirs. That thought, fragile and thin, carried her through the night. Somewhere outside, the wind combed through the orchard as though searching for secrets, and the house groaned in response, settling into the silence of a new beginning. By morning, the property looked no brighter. The orchard stretched endlessly, rows of dead wood casting long shadows across frost-hardened soil. The farmhouse loomed like a forgotten relic, but the sun pierced through clouds in narrow beams, lighting the land in fragments, and for a brief moment Maya thought she saw something else beneath the ruin. Possibility. It was buried deep, wrapped in decay, but it was there, waiting. She did not yet know what, but she felt it, faint as a whisper. And so the first day of her inheritance began, not with triumph or relief, but with a fragile thread of determination. The orchard had been given to her, and now it was hers to carry, whether as curse or redemption. She closed the door against the wind, drew Eli close, and faced the silence that hung heavier than any noise. The orchard waited, and Maya did not yet know that it carried more than trees and memories. It carried secrets, and it had chosen her to uncover them. The house did not breathe with warmth in the morning. It exhaled dust and the faint smell of mildew, as though the walls had grown accustomed to silence and were reluctant to welcome life back inside. Maya rose early, driven less by rest and more by the restless weight that had carried her through the night. The mattress was lumpy and thin, the blanket smelled of moths, and her body ached from the long drive. She crept down the creaking stairs, her steps echoing in rooms that had forgotten the sound of footsteps. The kitchen looked the same as the night before, shadows crouching in corners, the table scarred and pale, the air thick with stillness. She poured herself a glass of water, clearer this time, but still tasting of rust, and drank as if swallowing the unfamiliar place itself. Outside, the orchard stretched like a graveyard of trees, branches clawing skyward, the frost glinting against brittle bark. She pulled on her jacket and boots, and with Eli awake now and darting to the door, they stepped outside together. The air bit sharp against her lungs, but beneath the cold was a sweetness, faint but undeniable, like apples buried in memory. For Eli, it was enchantment. She ran ahead, weaving between crooked trunks, her laughter cutting through the desolate field. For Maya, each step was heavier. She scanned the land as though searching for a reason, any reason, to believe this inheritance had value. The first days passed slowly. Maya cleaned, sweeping dust from rooms that seemed to resist her presence, scrubbing counters stained with decades of disuse. She shook moth-eaten curtains until light found its way through the windows, cut firewood from fallen branches, and fought the endless sense that she was an intruder in her grandmother's forgotten world. At night she lay awake, listening to the orchard. The wind threaded through the trees, carrying with it sounds that were not merely branches shifting, but something deeper. She told herself it was nonsense, her imagination sharpening shadows into voices. Yet the thought persisted. Eli whispered, before drifting to sleep, that the trees were talking. Maya hushed her, not out of disbelief, but out of fear that the child had heard the same unexplainable sounds. On the third night, the whisper grew too loud to ignore. The house lay shrouded in moonlight, its boards groaning in rhythm with the wind. Maya had finally dozed when she was pulled awake by a soft creak outside the window. She rose, heart quickening, and patted down the stairs. At the back door, the cold hit her like a slap, and the orchard loomed in a pale silver glow. She thought she heard words, faint, curling between the trees, not formed by human lips but by branches scratching against each other in patterns too deliberate. She stood for long minutes, pulse racing, until Eli's small voice startled her. The girl had followed, clutching her blanket, eyes wide and unafraid. "They're calling us," she said softly. Maya gathered her close, angered by the chill in her own spine, and forced them both back inside. Morning offered no answers, only soil damp with frost and footprints leading to a tree near the center of the orchard. Eli's shoes were too small to have left them, and Maya knew she had not walked there. The sight lingered in her mind as she tried to return to chores. Later, as she hung sheets to dry on a line sagging between two posts, she saw Eli crouched at the base of the same tree, digging with her hands. She rushed over, prepared to scold, but stopped short. The ground was soft, unnaturally so, as if it had been disturbed recently. Her daughter looked up, dirt smudged across her cheeks, eyes bright with discovery. "It's loose here," she said, and clawed again at the earth. Maya knelt, feeling the soil crumble easily between her fingers. A sense of unease pressed down on her chest, heavier with each scoop of dirt. Within minutes, her hand struck metal, cold and rough. Her breath caught. Together, they unearthed the edge of a small iron box, rusted but intact. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been, resisting her grip as though the earth was reluctant to surrender it. She pulled until it came free, coughing as dust and soil rose in a cloud around them. The orchard fell silent in that moment, as if waiting. The box was simple, its hinges rusted shut, but after several strikes with a stone, it groaned open, a sound like something exhaling after years of being buried. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, lay a brass key and a bundle of yellowed papers. The key gleamed faintly even in the gray light, engraved with small, precise letters. Swiss Bank. Maya stared, uncomprehending. The papers unfolded with a brittle crackle, revealing neat rows of numbers and letters arranged in sequences that looked too deliberate to be random. Her heart pounded as her eyes tried to make sense of them. It was not an account number, not exactly, but a code, its meaning locked beyond her reach. Eli leaned close, fascinated, whispering questions that Maya could not answer. She quickly folded the papers and slipped both them and the key back into the box, closing it with trembling hands. Fear churned in her stomach, mingled with disbelief. Why would her grandmother have hidden such things beneath a tree? Why not jewelry, photographs, or trinkets of memory? Why a foreign bank key and codes that spoke of secrets far removed from an orchard? That night the wind rose again, carrying with it the same strange cadence. Maya sat at the kitchen table with the box beside her, the lamp casting a weak glow over its rusted surface. Eli slept upstairs, but the child's words echoed still. "They're calling us." She pressed her fingers against the brass key, cold against her skin, and felt the weight of it sink into her bones. The orchard outside creaked and shifted as though it approved of the discovery, as though it had been waiting for this moment. Sleep did not come. The whispers returned, louder now, curling into the house through cracks in the boards, wrapping around her thoughts. She told herself it was the wind, nothing more. But the box sat before her like proof of something larger. The orchard was not simply dead land. It was a keeper of secrets, one that had chosen to reveal itself to her and her daughter. As dawn crawled across the horizon, painting the dead trees in pale gold, Maya realized that whatever her grandmother had left behind, it was not just an inheritance of soil and wood. It was a legacy wrapped in silence, waiting to be unearthed. And the orchard, with its skeletal limbs and whispering voice, was only just beginning to speak. The morning after the discovery of the box dawned with a stillness that felt unnatural, as though the orchard itself was holding its breath. The sun rose pale behind a veil of thin clouds, its light spreading across the skeletal trees and spilling through the cracked windows of the farmhouse. Maya sat at the kitchen table, the box hidden in the cupboard behind her, its weight seeming to fill the entire room despite being out of sight. She had hardly slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the brass key glinting in her hand, felt the strange tremor of unease that had followed her since unearthing it. Eli had fallen asleep quickly the night before, exhausted from the excitement of their discovery, and now the girl bounded down the stairs full of energy that her mother could not match. To Eli, the orchard was no longer just a forest of dead trees. It was an adventure, a world full of secrets waiting to be found. She chattered about digging more, about searching every tree for more hidden treasures. Maya hushed her, nerves tight, reminding her that some things were meant to remain secret, at least for now. She didn't know who or what might come searching for what they had found, but instinct told her the less people knew, the safer they would be. Still, as the day stretched on, she realized she could not leave the orchard in its current state. The house was barely habitable, the trees stood brittle and broken, and the land seemed to sag beneath the weight of neglect. She could not live here surrounded only by rot, not when she needed to believe there was a future. So she resolved, at least for her daughter's sake, to begin restoring what she could. They started with the smaller tasks, gathering fallen branches that littered the ground, clearing the weeds that strangled the base of the trees. The work was hard, the air cold against their skin, but the act of doing something, anything, lightened Maya's heart. She borrowed tools left behind in the shed, their handles splintered and their metal eaten with rust, yet still strong enough to cut and pry. Eli dragged away bundles of dead twigs, her laughter ringing out each time she tripped or found a beetle scurrying from the undergrowth. For the first time in years, Maya felt something close to purpose. By afternoon, sweat dampened her brow despite the chill. She wiped her hands against her jeans, dirt staining her palms, and looked around. A small corner of the orchard looked different now, less like a graveyard, more like a place waiting to live again. The branches they had cut left space for pale sunlight to reach the ground, and the earth, freed of weeds, seemed to breathe easier. She felt a flicker of pride, a fragile spark inside her chest. It was not much, but it was a beginning. Later, while rummaging through a drawer in the farmhouse, Maya found a photograph, yellowed with age, tucked beneath a stack of old newspapers. It showed her grandmother standing in the orchard many years ago, surrounded by a group of women and children. They were smiling, holding baskets of apples, their faces glowing with joy. Her grandmother, stern and reserved in Maya's childhood memory, looked younger and softer here, her eyes alive in a way Maya had never seen. She traced the edges of the photograph with her finger, her throat tightening. Perhaps this place had once been more than land. Perhaps it had been a sanctuary, a gathering place, a source of nourishment for more than just the body. As evening fell, she and Eli sat together on the porch, their legs dangling over the edge. The orchard stretched before them, quiet but not lifeless. The wind stirred gently, carrying the faintest scent of earth and something sweeter, like the memory of apples long gone. Eli leaned her head against Maya's arm, sighing with contentment. "It feels different now," she murmured. Maya looked at the rows of trees, and for the first time she agreed. That night, as she prepared for bed, she noticed something she had not seen before. Tiny green buds clung stubbornly to a branch near the edge of the orchard, fragile but unmistakably new. She blinked, wondering if her tired eyes were playing tricks on her. Yet when she reached out to touch them, they were real, soft beneath her fingertips, a sign of life among the decay. A strange shiver passed through her, not of fear but of wonder. Perhaps the land was responding to her efforts, or perhaps it had simply been waiting for someone to care again. Sleep came easier that night, though dreams swirled in restless colors. She saw her grandmother's face, stern yet protective, saw hands writing numbers into ledgers, saw apples blooming white across the branches of dead trees. When she woke, the images lingered, as if her grandmother was trying to speak to her through the shadows of memory. Days passed, and slowly the orchard began to shift. More buds appeared, faint touches of green amid the brown, and patches of grass grew thicker where weeds had once strangled the soil. The house, too, began to lose its oppressive silence. Curtains washed and rehung, fluttered in the breeze. Sunlight cut through the gloom, and the echo of Eli's laughter filled rooms that had long stood empty. The place no longer felt entirely like a tombstone. It felt like a space caught between death and rebirth, waiting for the balance to tip. One evening, Maya stood at the edge of the property, staring out at the orchard bathed in fading light. Her hands were sore, her back ached, and dirt clung beneath her fingernails. But her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She thought of the box hidden in the cupboard, the key and the strange codes that hinted at a mystery she was not ready to face. For now it was enough to restore what she could see and touch. The orchard was her burden, yes, but it was also her chance. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared, she whispered into the wind, unsure if she was speaking to herself, to her grandmother, or to the orchard itself. "We're still here." The trees shifted in the breeze, their branches creaking softly, and for a fleeting moment Maya thought she heard a reply. Not words exactly, but something deeper, something alive. Dead and alive, decay and renewal, all bound together in this forgotten land. She did not know yet what secrets it held, nor how dangerous they might be, but she knew one truth with certainty. The orchard was no longer silent, it was beginning to wake. The buds on the branches had been the first fragile promise that the orchard could live again, and for several days Maya clung to that promise like a lifeline. Each morning she walked with Eli through the rows of trees, her daughter darting ahead to point at patches of new green, or crouching low to watch beetles scurry through the weeds. The orchard still looked more dead than alive, but now it no longer felt like a graveyard. It felt like a patient beginning to stir, groggy and weak, but breathing. That sense of fragile progress steadied Maya's heart. She rose early, worked until her muscles ached, and fell into bed with dirt still under her fingernails. The fear that had gripped her when she unearthed the box was not gone, but it dulled in the rhythm of labor. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in a future that was not entirely defined by struggle. Yet change brought attention, and attention did not come kindly. The first man appeared one bright afternoon as Maya knelt near the porch, scrubbing grime from a cracked flower pot she had found among the weeds. His car announced him before she saw him, too new and too polished for the rutted road that led to the farm. A sleek black sedan rolled to a stop at the edge of the property, its windows gleaming like obsidian in the sun. Maya wiped her hands on her jeans, squinting against the light as the door opened, and a man in a pressed suit stepped out. He looked wrong against the backdrop of the orchard, like an expensive photograph pasted onto a ruined canvas. He walked toward her with measured steps, his shoes too clean to have ever touched soil like this. His smile was polite, but his eyes were not. They were sharp, assessing, and carried a hunger that made Maya's stomach tighten. He greeted her by name before she offered it, and introduced himself as a representative of an investment group. He spoke smoothly of opportunity, of revitalization, of acquiring neglected land for generous compensation. Then he unfolded a paper from his briefcase, setting it on the railing with deliberate care. The offer made her breath catch. It was far more than the land could possibly be worth, 20 times what any appraiser might have claimed. Enough to erase debts, enough to build a new life far away from this place. For a moment the temptation shimmered before her eyes, the thought of escape so close she could almost taste it. But then she remembered the box hidden in the cupboard, the brass key that glinted like a warning, and the photograph of her grandmother smiling in the orchard. She remembered the new buds struggling to grow on dead branches. None of it made sense, and yet it told her one thing. This land mattered more than she yet understood. She pushed the paper back toward him, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "It's not for sale." The man's smile did not falter, but something in his expression shifted. A flicker of irritation quickly smothered beneath courtesy. He left his card on the railing and departed with a warning wrapped in politeness, his words like velvet hiding a blade. As the sedan vanished down the road, Maya stood rooted to the porch, her chest tight. Eli pressed her face against the window from inside, eyes wide and uncertain. Maya forced herself to smile for her daughter's sake, though unease gnawed at her ribs. That night she did not sleep well. Every sound outside seemed louder, every creak of the orchard branches sharper. She rose twice to check the doors, once to peer through the window, half convinced she would see the black car idling at the gate. Each time the land lay still, the wind brushing through the trees as it always had. Yet her nerves did not ease. The second intrusion came a few days later. She and Eli had spent the morning clearing weeds when she noticed footprints near the edge of the property, larger than her own, too fresh to be remnants of old farm hands. They trailed along the fence line before vanishing into the undergrowth. Her skin prickled as she studied them, the silence of the orchard pressing against her ears. She said nothing to Eli, who skipped ahead without noticing, but her own steps grew quicker as she herded the girl back toward the house. That evening, as the last of the sunlight faded, she found something on the porch. At first she thought it was one of Eli's toys left outside, but as she bent down her stomach dropped. It was an apple split neatly in two, and through its pale flesh a rusted nail had been driven. She stared at it for long moments, her breath shallow, the shadows lengthening around her. It was not a childish prank. It was a message. Fear tightened its grip on her, but anger rose with it. Whoever had left the apple wanted her frightened, wanted her gone, and she would not give them that satisfaction. She scooped it up, marched inside, and threw it into the stove until it blackened in the flames. Eli asked what was burning, her voice small, and Maya told her it was nothing. But her daughter's eyes lingered too long on her face, reading what she did not say. From that night onward, the orchard no longer felt like it belonged only to them. Shadows moved at its edges, glimpsed from the corner of her eye. The wind seemed to carry footsteps between the trees. She began locking the doors not just at night but during the day, and each knock at the door made her heart lurch. The orchard was no longer simply waking. It was drawing attention, and not all of it friendly. One morning she rose early, the world outside still wrapped in dawn mist. She stepped onto the porch with a cup of bitter coffee, her eyes scanning the horizon. The orchard stood silent, its branches reaching upward like skeletal arms. She thought of the box hidden in the cupboard, the code she could not decipher, the brass key heavy in her memory. She thought of her grandmother smiling in that photograph among women and children, the orchard alive with apples. She did not yet know why this land carried secrets, nor why strangers circled it like vultures. But she knew one truth with clarity. The orchard was hers, and she would not surrender it. When Eli came bounding onto the porch, still wrapped in her blanket, Maya drew her daughter close and pressed her lips to the top of her head. Beyond the fence, shadows lingered, patient and watchful. The orchard whispered again in the wind, a sound that no longer felt like imagination. It was warning her, steady and insistent, that their lives had shifted onto a path from which there would be no turning back. And as she looked across the rows of brittle trees, now flecked with green, Maya felt the weight of that truth settle deep in her chest. The orchard carried life and death together, and she would have to fight to decide which would prevail. The nights grew heavier after the warning on the porch. Sleep had always been fragile for Maya, a light thing easily broken, but now it dissolved entirely, scattered like ash with each groan of the house and each restless shift of wind through the trees. The orchard no longer felt merely strange or sorrowful. It felt watched. When she walked its rows, she could not shake the sense that eyes followed her, that the silence carried not only the weight of neglect, but of expectation. Eli, though braver than she herself admitted, grew quieter. The child no longer ran so far from the porch, and more often than not she stayed close, glancing over her shoulder when the branches rattled too sharply. One morning, while the air still held the chill of dawn, Maya rose early to fetch water from the pump near the barn. Eli trailed after her in her blanket, sleepy-eyed but unwilling to be left behind. As they walked, the girl pointed suddenly toward the far edge of the property, where a line of stones had collapsed inward upon themselves. Beyond them, covered in weeds and boards rotted black with age, lay the old well. Maya had passed it before without thought, another ruin among many, but Eli tugged her hand with unexpected insistence. "There's something there," the girl whispered. Her small finger pointed to the boards, which had shifted slightly, as though the ground itself had pushed against them from below. Maya felt unease coil in her chest, remembering the apple with the nail, the footprints near the fence, the man's polished shoes on her porch. She told herself it was only a well, only a hole in the earth long abandoned, but her body moved toward it despite the dread that pressed on her shoulders. The boards gave way easily under her hand, crumbling into splinters. Beneath them yawned darkness, a narrow mouth of stone lined with damp moss. The air rising from it was cool and smelled of rust and earth. Eli leaned close, her eyes wide, but Maya held her back and shone the beam of her flashlight into the depths. 10 feet down, something glinted against the stones. Not water, not rock, but metal, deliberate and out of place. Her breath caught. Beside the well lay an old rope ladder, its fibers gray with mildew. She tested it with a cautious tug, and though half-rotted, it held. Fear urged her to leave, to drag her daughter back to the house and never return. But another voice, steady and insistent, told her she had to know. She secured the rope to the stones and began her descent, her boots slipping on the damp rungs. Eli crouched at the edge above, her face pale, whispering for her mother to be careful. At the bottom, the air pressed close, heavy with dampness. She swept her light across rubble and broken stones until it landed on the object that had gleamed. A small box rested half-buried, its surface tin, eaten with rust but intact. Her fingers trembled as she pried it free, the sound of metal scraping against stone loud in the suffocating silence. She set it against her knee, flicked her knife open, and forced the lid. It creaked, reluctant, before giving way. Inside lay stacks of papers wrapped in oilcloth, the edges yellowed but legible. She pulled them into the light, peeling the layers back until words and numbers revealed themselves. Columns of figures, signatures scrawled in her grandmother's hand, transfers and accounts written in precise detail. She flipped through them quickly, her heart hammering harder with each page. These were no ordinary household records. They spoke of hidden money, sums so large they made her vision swim. Millions upon millions, shifted between names, companies, and shell accounts. The numbers matched the strange codes she had found in the box beneath the tree. It was confirmation, undeniable and terrifying. Her grandmother had not simply owned an orchard. She had safeguarded something vast, something buried in shadows for decades. And now those shadows had lengthened to claim Maya and her daughter. A sound above made her freeze. A footstep, a shift of stone. Her light flickered against the damp walls as she held her breath, listening. Eli called down softly, her voice thin with fear, but no other answer came. Slowly, she climbed the rope back to the surface, the box heavy against her chest. The orchard stretched quiet and gray, the morning light thin through the branches. Yet Maya felt eyes upon her, unseen but certain. She carried the box into the house, bolted the door behind her, and spread the papers across the kitchen table. Eli hovered close, silent now, sensing the weight of what her mother had found. The handwriting was steady, her grandmother's script, neat and disciplined. Each page was a piece of a puzzle she could not yet see fully. But one truth was clear. The orchard was no accident, no simple inheritance. It was a vault, a hiding place, a fortress disguised as decay. And by leaving it to Maya, her grandmother had handed her not only land, but a burden heavy enough to draw danger to their door. By midday, the danger announced itself. A knock at the porch, sharp and deliberate, echoed through the house. Maya's blood chilled as she opened the door. The man who stood there wore another suit, not the same as before, but cut from the same cloth, his expression measured, his smile false. He spoke with the ease of someone who believed he already owned what he sought. He told her she was in possession of property that did not rightfully belong to her, that the orchard and whatever was buried within it were collateral for debts her grandmother had no right to incur. His voice was smooth, but his words were threats, cloaked in legal terms. Maya held the doorframe, her heart pounding. She wanted to scream, to drive him away, but fear kept her still. Behind her, Eli peeked from the stairs, eyes wide and frightened. The man noticed the child, his smile tightening, and Maya's stomach turned to ice. She pushed the door closed with all the force she had, bolted it, and leaned against it as though holding back a flood. For long moments she stood there, her breath ragged, listening as his footsteps receded down the porch. She knew he would not be the last. She knew this was only the beginning. When night fell, she sat again at the table, the document spread before her, the brass key cold in her palm. The orchard groaned in the wind outside, its branches rattling like bones. Eli slept fitfully in the next room, clutching her blanket tight. Maya stared at the figures on the page until they blurred, the truth pressing in on her chest. Her grandmother had hidden something immense, and now that secret had passed to her. It was not only money, it was history, power, and danger, sealed beneath trees and stones. The orchard was alive with whispers, and now she understood them. They were not just echoes of wind through branches. They were warnings, insistent and unrelenting. The land had carried its secret for decades, and now it demanded she carry it too. She pressed her hands over the papers, feeling the weight of her grandmother's legacy settle upon her shoulders, and whispered into the silence a vow she was not sure she could keep. She would not run, and outside, unseen beyond the fence, the shadows listened. The days that followed the visit from the man in the suit carried the uneasy silence of a storm that had not yet broken. The orchard whispered more insistently, its branches creaking at night in ways that seemed almost deliberate. Maya kept the doors bolted and the curtains drawn, her nerves stretched thin. She no longer allowed Eli to wander among the trees on her own. The land that had seemed like a sanctuary a week earlier now felt like a chessboard, every shadow a potential move from an opponent she could not yet see clearly. The papers from the well lay spread across the kitchen table night after night. Maya studied them until her eyes ached, tracing lines of figures she could not fully comprehend. They were more than numbers. They were testimony. Each transfer and signature carried the weight of a history her grandmother had hidden from the world. The brass key seemed to pulse with meaning whenever she touched it, a reminder that the truth was larger than she could hold alone. She needed someone who could give these documents authority, someone who could protect her and Eli from the encroaching threat. It was desperation that pushed her to seek a lawyer in town. She drove the battered car down the winding road, the orchard vanishing in the rearview mirror like a receding shadow. Eli sat beside her, quiet, clutching her stuffed bear in silence. The town was small, a single main street lined with shuttered shops and one modest law office with a brass plate on the door. The man she met there was cautious but kind, his graying hair and the steady eyes lending him an air of patience. He listened as she explained, her voice trembling, about the inheritance, the documents, the visitors in suits. At first his expression was skeptical, as though he assumed she was exaggerating. But when she placed the ledgers before him and he began to read, his face changed. "These are extraordinary," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. "If they are authentic, they do not merely prove ownership. They reveal a concealment of assets on a massive scale." He leaned back, his eyes narrowing in thought. "You could be in danger, Mrs. Johnson, but you may also have the means to fight." The word fight echoed in her ears all the way home. She had spent so many years simply surviving, bending under weight, enduring whatever hardship came her way. Now the orchard had thrust her into a battle not of her choosing, and she did not know if she was strong enough to face it. But as she watched Eli asleep that night, her small chest rising and falling in fragile rhythm, she knew she had no choice. The legal summons arrived days later. An envelope slid under the door by unseen hands, its contents printed on heavy paper. The orchard, it declared, had been acquired fraudulently by her grandmother, who had embezzled funds from corporations decades before. The land and any hidden accounts tied to it were the rightful property of those companies. Maya felt her blood boil as she read, her fists clenching tight. They were rewriting her grandmother's story, painting her as a thief rather than a guardian. The lawyer filed a response, and soon the courthouse date was set. The weeks leading up to it blurred into a haze of preparation. Maya provided every document, every scrap of handwriting, every ledger page. She practiced answers to questions she dreaded, her palms sweating each time. She prayed each night, though she did not know if anyone was listening. The orchard seemed to sense the gravity of what loomed ahead. Its branches moaned louder in the wind, and sometimes, when she walked alone at dusk, she thought she heard a low hum, a chorus of voices buried in bark and root, urging her not to falter. The day of the trial dawned gray, the sky swollen with clouds. Maya wore her best dress, a plain thing but clean, and braided Eli's hair neatly, though the child would not be allowed inside the courtroom. Her lawyer met her at the steps, papers in his hands, his expression grim but steady. Together they entered the tall building, its walls lined with cold marble that made her feel small and exposed. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of oak polish and dust. The men from the consortium sat across the aisle, their suits sharp, their folders thick with accusations. At the center sat Howard Ellis, the man who had come first to her porch with his polished shoes and false smile. Now his expression was sharpened into something predatory, the mask of politeness stripped away. He looked at her not as an equal opponent, but as an obstacle to be removed. The proceedings began with a flurry of words she barely understood, legal language twisted into spears. They called her grandmother a criminal, accused her of theft, fraud, and deceit. They argued that Maya was attempting to profit from stolen funds, that she had no moral or legal right to any of it. Their voices were calm, authoritative, dripping with confidence. Each word felt like a stone cast against her, chipping away at her resolve. But then her lawyer rose, and he placed her grandmother's ledgers on the table where the judge could see. He read aloud the handwriting, steady and meticulous, that showed not embezzlement, but preservation. He pointed to the patterns of transfers, to the accounts frozen and left untouched, not siphoned for personal gain, but locked away beyond the reach of corruption. He showed the brass key, sealed in an envelope, its engraving bearing witness to the truth. He placed the code on record, connecting it to the accounts her grandmother had safeguarded. As he spoke, Maya felt the tide shift. The judge leaned forward, her eyes sharpening. The men in suits fidgeted, their polished composure fraying. Ellis's jaw tightened as he scribbled notes, his gaze flicking toward her with a hatred that burned cold. When the judge finally spoke, the chamber stilled. "The evidence is clear," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "The assets were not stolen for personal enrichment. They were preserved. The designation of beneficiary is explicit. This inheritance belongs to Maya Johnson. Ownership is hereby recognized." The gavel struck once, the sound echoing like thunder through the room. Maya sat frozen, her hands gripping the table, her breath caught in her throat. Relief did not come as swiftly as she imagined it would. Instead, a tremor ran through her, the weight of everything pressing down. The battle had been won, but she knew the war was far from over. Men like Ellis did not vanish simply because a judge had spoken. As she stepped out of the courthouse, the air felt different, sharper, carrying with it the scent of rain. Reporters crowded near, their questions flying like arrows. Hidden fortune, secret orchard, millions concealed. Maya ignored them, clutching her lawyer's arm as he guided her through the throng. Across the street, she saw Ellis watching, his smile gone, his eyes promising that this was not finished. A shiver passed through her despite the heat of victory. That evening, back at the orchard, she sat on the porch with Eli asleep in her lap. The branches whispered above them, swaying in the breeze. For the first time, the sound did not frighten her. It steadied her, like the low voice of her grandmother carried across years. She had fought, and she had not bent. The orchard was still hers. Yet as the stars emerged one by one in the dark sky, she understood the truth. Winning in court was not the end of the struggle. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would have to decide what to do with the legacy she had defended. It was no longer enough simply to hold the orchard. She would have to make it live again, to transform the burden into something worthy of the sacrifice her grandmother had made. The orchard was not a hiding place anymore. It was a calling. And Maya knew the greatest battle was still to come, to turn the shadow of wealth into light, and to give the orchard back its life. The storm of the courthouse had passed, but in its wake there was no silence, only the heavy awareness that life could never return to what it had been before. The gavel had fallen, the words of the judge had declared the inheritance hers, yet Maya carried no triumph in her chest. Relief came and went like the brief break in a storm cloud, leaving behind the sobering clarity that the orchard was not just a patch of land or a vault of forgotten wealth. It was a charge, a responsibility passed from her grandmother's hands to her own. She had fought and won, but battles always left scars, and even victories had their weight. The weeks after the verdict were filled with a restless energy. The papers that had once been spread across her kitchen table were now secured, archived properly, copied and sealed so that no corporation could erase them with accusations or half-truths. The brass key rested in a deposit box at the county bank, no longer hidden beneath her grandmother's floorboards, but its memory still pressed against her palm whenever she closed her hand. She had not only defended her right to the orchard, she had defended her grandmother's honor, reclaimed her story from those who sought to twist it into theft. The orchard was safe, at least for now, and that safety gave her room to breathe for the first time in years. It was Eli who pushed her to look forward rather than back. The girl ran through the orchard daily, pointing to buds swelling into blossoms, tracing the fragile green that spread like veins through the brown. She begged her mother to plant new saplings, to cut away the trunks too far gone to revive. Each time Maya hesitated, weighed down by the cost and the risk, Eli looked at her with those unshaken eyes and said, "If we don't, it will die for real." And so Maya listened. She called in help, men and women from the town who still knew how to work the land, who remembered orchards in their prime. At first they came skeptically, curious more than committed, but soon the work itself drew them in. Chainsaws cut through dead wood, tractors tore away the weeds that had strangled the soil, and trucks brought in young saplings to plant in the open rows. Maya worked among them, her hands blistered, her back sore, refusing to stand apart simply because she was the owner. The orchard was no longer a place of ruin. It was becoming a place of labor, of shared sweat and shared vision. The transformation did not happen overnight. It came slowly, as all things alive must, but it was steady. Brown gave way to green. Silence gave way to the chatter of workers and the laughter of Eli as she skipped between the rows. The air began to carry once more the fragrance of earth turning fertile, of grass cut clean, of blossoms daring to bloom. And when spring came in its full, the orchard no longer looked like a cemetery. It looked like a field of promise. But the orchard alone was not enough. The money, vast and almost incomprehensible, lay waiting, and Maya could not keep it locked away like her grandmother had. It had to be used, not hoarded, transformed from shadow into light. She thought often of the photographs she had found, of her grandmother standing among women and children, baskets of apples in their arms, their faces bright with joy. That image guided her more than any lawyer's counsel or any banker's advice. Her grandmother had wanted this place to give, not just to hold. And so Maya began to build. The farmhouse that had sagged under years of neglect was repaired, its roof straightened, its walls painted fresh. Then beyond it, new buildings rose, not for her comfort, but for others. She named it the Johnson Center, though in her heart she thought of it as her grandmother's legacy. It became a place for mothers like herself, women who had known the weight of abandonment, poverty, and struggle. It became a place where children could play in safety, where laughter could replace silence. Rooms were filled with beds and books, kitchens stocked with food, classrooms with desks. The orchard fed them, but more than that, it symbolized for them a second chance, a life that could be reborn even after years of decay. Eli thrived in this new world, her energy boundless, her voice carrying across the fields like a bird's call. She helped plant trees, carrying small pails of water, clapping with delight when the first blossoms opened. She played with children who arrived clutching their mother's hands, nervous and weary, and together they made the orchard ring with life again. Maya watched her daughter from the porch many evenings, the setting sun gilding her curls, and felt tears rise unbidden. She had feared so much for Eli's future, but now she saw it stretching bright before her, rooted in this soil. As the months passed, the orchard became more than hers. It belonged to those who came and found refuge within it. It became a symbol in the town, once whispered about as a place of ruin and secrets, now spoken of as a place of hope. Reporters who had hounded her after the trial eventually returned, but this time their cameras caught the sight of blossoms heavy on the trees and children running free among them. Their stories no longer framed the orchard as a scandal or a vault of stolen wealth, but as a rebirth, a testament to resilience. Maya walked one evening to the old apple tree where she and Eli had first uncovered the box. Its branches, once gnarled and bare, now bore blossoms white as snow, trembling in the breeze. She placed her hand on its trunk, rough beneath her palm, and whispered words she had never spoken aloud. "I understand now." She thought of her grandmother, of the woman who had hidden secrets not out of greed, but out of protection, who had trusted her granddaughter to inherit more than numbers in a ledger. She had inherited duty, strength, and the chance to turn shadow into light. The orchard stood alive around her, the hum of insects filling the dusk, the laughter of children drifting from the farmhouse. She knew danger would never vanish completely, that men like Ellis would always lurk at the edges of power, resentful of what they had lost. But she no longer feared them. She had fought once, and she would fight again if she must. The orchard had given her its whispers, its burdens, and finally its rebirth. When the first harvest came, the trees bent heavy with apples, their skins bright and sweet. The workers gathered them in baskets, the children bit into them with juice dripping down their chins, and Maya stood at the center of it all, with Eli's hand in hers. For the first time in years, she felt whole. She was no longer only a survivor, no longer only a mother clawing for scraps. She was the keeper of a legacy, the bearer of a gift too great to measure. The orchard had once been a place of shadows and silence. Now it was alive, radiant with blossoms and fruit, filled with voices and laughter. And in that renewal, Maya understood what her grandmother had known all along, that true inheritance is not measured in wealth, but in what one does with it, in the life it creates and sustains. The wind moved softly through the branches, carrying not whispers of warning, but a song of renewal. Maya closed her eyes, listening, and when she opened them again, she saw Eli smiling up at her, apple in hand, her face bright with the joy of a child who knows she is safe. The orchard was reborn, and so were they. Don't miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button now and turn on the bell so you never miss a story. Check out our other shocking videos waiting for you on the channel and share this one with friends so they can uncover the secret too.